ask it out loud.
Cool. We are recording now.
Sweet. Okay. So I know that we've previously had a training on it, but I feel like it was a bit high level for the support team. I felt like it was more of almost like just an intro to it, or like a sales training versus how to support the integration. So I wanted to go more in a technical deep dive situation, actually go through the process of setting up the integration so you can see how that works, because there's the potential someone would call in and say, oh, how do I find my consumer key or whatever? And you need to know, where to point them to. Of course, you can use the docs to do so, but it's also helpful to just kind of know what you're talking about. So we'll talk about why NetSuite, availability and costs, how it works. Then we'll go through the enabling and setting it up. We'll go through some examples of things that have synced and example sites, how to use it, that sort of thing, how to support it as well, because we do have some tools available. So why NetSuite? There's a lot going on, but essentially the integration uses it as an accounting system, but it's a little bit more robust than QuickBooks and Xero. Within NetSuite, you can do revenue recognition, inventory management, automated shipping of items, that sort of thing. I know with Xero and QuickBooks, there's some of those features, but I feel like they're kind of like those features, but light versions of them. In addition, NetSuite can act as a data repository, and you can plug analytic tools into it and then report off of that. So we're probably not going to get too many questions on the support side of things of why I should choose NetSuite over, QuickBooks or Xero. But if you do get those sort of questions, I feel like it's totally appropriate to ask in the support room. We can maybe get Tony involved, since, he kind of spearheaded this and talk to merchants about what their use cases are, that sort of thing. So if those questions do come up, we can figure it out and answer them on the fly. Availability. So it's only the new invoice architecture. So any existing, merchants on the old billing are not going to be able to utilize it until they can backport their sites, or they start a new site, of course, and that be on invoice architecture. There is a cost associated with it. It's $3.99 a month, additional charge. So they have their plan level, the revenue or whatever, plus, and then this would be an added on, this is component, think of it that way. So I think there's room for negotiation though in that cost. I know sales is going to be able to negotiate costs there. Customer success, I think, will have a little bit of wiggle room as well. So,
John, one thing to add to that, we're also talking about a potential paid install fee. Really not a lot of details around that yet, but it's something we might offer in the future.
Okay, so similar to Salesforce install, be similar to that, where we'd likely get access to their NetSuite account and go through the setup process, which you'll see right now. So you'll see how difficult it can be. So you can see how a merchant would potentially want to pay for that. So how it works is it's a one-way sync, Chargify to NetSuite. Every 2 hours, the integration will check for new invoices on the /invoices endpoint. If there's new invoices, it will go ahead and sync them over to NetSuite. And we allow for syncing inventory items and non-inventory items. The workflow is a little bit different for each of those. We're going to cover those, and we'll look at examples as well, so you know how that each of those kind of differ. But from what things in Chargify versus what's in NetSuite, so products, components, one-time charges, taxes are all kind of they are categorized as items in NetSuite. Customer is a customer. That's pretty simple. An invoice will always generate both a sales order and an invoice. So you can think of a sales order as the order itself, right? So I go to a website, I put in an order for an item, that's the order. And then to collect money on that, you would have the invoice. And then there would be, again, a payment against that invoice. So just keep that in mind. There's almost 3 parts to the puzzle. For us, it's invoice payment. On NetSuite, it's sales order, invoice, and then a payment to that invoice. So we'll talk about the inventory items workflow, and then we'll talk about non-inventory items. So when you go through the setup process, and you'll see this, you map a Chartify product component, so on to specific items in NetSuite. Those items can be marked as inventory items. So what that means is they have to be essentially fulfilled to ship. So think of it like your warehouse would receive the sales order and invoice. They then go pick the item off the shelf. They mark that in NetSuite. They then package it all up. They mark that in NetSuite. Then they ship it off, and then they mark it as actually shipped. And then at that point, they would like invoice and charge the customer. So there is automated processes to it, but it can be a manual process. What that means though is we can't sync the invoice essentially over to NetSuite until they've actually filled the order. So what happens is the invoice gets generated in Chartify, creates a sales order in NetSuite. The payment does get synced over immediately as it's called a customer deposit, but it's not linked to anything yet. We then have to wait for them to go into NetSuite, fulfill the order, and then once that's completed, we'll then sync the invoice over to NetSuite, and then it'll be like marked as paid, and that whole process will be completed. And you'll see how that works through. And we do give notifications in the integration that they have items that need to go get fulfilled for us to sync them. So it actually gives them kind of a list that they have to work through within the Chartify integration screen as well. Non-inventory items, super simple. For automatic subscriptions, something that's paid right away. Invoice gets generated and paid in Chartify. It creates a sales order, invoice, and customer payment in NetSuite. For remittance billing, the invoice is generated in Chartify. It'll go over as a sales order and an invoice in like an open state, similar to Chartify. And then when the payment actually comes through on that invoice, we will sync the payment to the proper invoice within NetSuite. So you will be able to see open unpaid invoices within the NetSuite application. Access. So for y'all, it's just going to the feature rollout, enabling it with your specific site ID. For merchant requests at the moment, and this may change. Kayla talked a bit about it at yesterday's stand-up, but at the moment, any sort of request to enable this, it's going to need to move into the customer success queue via a ticket, where they'll figure out kind of the process and everything like that. Obviously, once we work out how that process is going to look, we will keep everyone posted. But at the moment, if someone chats in or calls, move it to a ticket, and then we'll work with CS on that. So for how to enable it, once you enable the rollout of it, you'll just find it within the integration section under the NetSuite category on the left side. So we will actually, let me exit out of here. We'll go through the whole process of enabling this, and you'll see kind of the workflow that the merchant's going to have to go through. So first things first is you'll see on this site here, I don't have it in my options here. So we will need to get the site ID, and then we'll go to the rollout, and then rollout is just called NetSuite. Within there, you come down, choose the site, and go ahead and add it.
So the merchant won't see NetSuite as an option at all until we enable it?
At the moment.
Okay.
But I think I did see a notification in the ecosystem room about them implementing like almost like a splash screen that will like give them info, and then from that point, I'm not sure what the workflow would be if they like click something and then it contacts us, and then we still enable it or what. But at the moment, yeah, it is a manual process to go in and enable it.
Okay. Yeah. Once they have that, I was talking to Tony about it yesterday, then they'll click a button, it'll create a ticket, and then I have to find out what the subject line of the ticket is, and we can automate that going into customer success queue instead of support.
Cool. So I enabled it, right? NetSuite training, NetSuite. Where is it? That's weird. Netsuite training 63122. 63122. Let's see if it's something with like our admin logins. Okay, that's really weird. Well, we will just use this one instead. And I will follow up with Tony or the team about that. So I'm going to disconnect this and we'll go through the start. So we want to edit credentials. Actually, we'll go disable, enable. Oh, I guess we'll just edit the credentials. So that normally you would enable it, and this is the screen you would see here. It's going to request for these 5 items essentially to connect to NetSuite. In the documentation, it does walk you through, or the merchant through, all the steps to grab this information. So we'll do that now. So the first step is to duplicate. So the first step is to go to your company information. By the way, this is NetSuite. It is super complicated. There's just stuff buried in lists and all this sort of thing. So there's only a few key things we need to be looking at. So I'll point those out. But we are getting a shared login for people to utilize so that you guys can access and play around with it. So we'll get that. I'll get that posted to the support room after this training. So the first step is set up company information. From there, this account ID is what's being requested here. So that goes in there. So that's step 1 here. Next is to create an integration record. This is going to allow us to get a consumer key and secret. So from here, we go to setup, we go to integration, and we go to manage integrations new. We got to give it a name. Support training. Let's see here. We want the state to be enabled. We want token-based authentication checked, and then we click save. All right, so once that's completed, you'll see here it generates these keys. Again, these are one-time key, sort of like our API keys. You only get it to see them once, and then they're gone. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these over just in case. So we'll grab the first one. You'll see that gets mapped here, consumer key. And then the second one is the consumer secret, and that goes here. All right, so the last 2 is getting a token ID and token secret. This one is the little bit more complicated one. So first you need to enable token-based authentication, which is already enabled on the account, but we'll go through the process there. So it's set up, company, enable features. Once that's done, there's the Suite Cloud option. And then down below here is token-based authentication. So once that's enabled, we can move on to the next step, which is to create a token role. So you go to setup, you go to users and roles, you do manage roles, new. This is Chartify support training. And then you have to actually go through and provide permissions to all of these on this side here. You have to go through and actually manually click each one of these and enable it. And mark the access. So we'll just do one of these. I already set up a role so that we don't have to sit here for 10 minutes and do this. So I'll just show you one. It would be doing this, you pick this, and then the level is, in this case, view, but if it was full, you see the list on the level it tells you, you would mark it appropriately. So you actually have to go through this for transactions. You then have to go through this for lists, and then you have to go through this for setup. all to be able to like have our integration access this. So this is probably the most complicated process, except for it's not really that complicated. It's just time consuming. It's literally just selecting the thing from the drop down, selecting the right access level, and then that's it. I know we kind of have, it's not similar in Salesforce, but there is kind of that like where you have to set all this stuff up ahead of time. So this is probably someone I could see the documentation for this and go, yeah, I'll pay Chargeify to set this up for me, because we can go through and add all of these. So it's just a matter of, you'll see the tabs here. You would just go through each one and add all the proper things and then save this out. So I already have a role set up. So what we'll do is instead apply that role to my user. So we go to employees. You just click this, leave. All right. From here, you would find the user, and this is mine. So we click edit. Under access section. So here, you would then select, so I already have mine set up, but you would then select the token role so that this particular user has access to that role. And then that then allows you to create an access token for that user, which is what we're going to put into the integration. So this whole process is to set it up so that the user can have an access token associated with it, so that we have the proper like read, write, and know where to like map things. So that after this, you come here, assign the token role, then we create the access token. So that's in setup. We go to user roles, we go to access tokens, then we go to new, application name, Chargeify, support training, Nick. And then the role will be the token role that we just applied to this user. And I believe that is it. So then we click save. And again, with same with the consumer key and secret, this will only be shown once. So we come in here and then we'll copy over the token ID, and then we copy the token secret. And then fingers crossed, when we click update and save, it validates it successfully. All right, so it did. So if we were going through the full setup process, what they would see next is this screen, which is managing your product catalog to the items within your NetSuite account. Two key things here is we separate out tax charge and one-time charge. Taxes, we don't use NetSuite's like built-in taxing system. We essentially apply taxes that we collect to a line item or an item called Chargeify tax item. So that will be mapped to that. And then for one-time charges, they can choose what to do with them, but I think in the documentation it says that they should create a one-time, they should create a product that essentially is associated with one-time charges, which is, one-time payments essentially. After that though, they just need to go through and choose what product should be mapped to what item in NetSuite. So all of these would not be filled out normally. They would be blank, and they have to go through, and won't let them go to the next step until they've mapped every single component or product to something, an item in NetSuite. This page saves automatically every time that they select something from the dropdown. If they navigate away from this page and come back, it'll actually load them back at the where they were before, which is pretty nice. So it kind of like stores their progress in case they, whatever their internet connection, craps out and, there are 100 items in or whatever, it'll save their progress. So you map all of these, then it would click, save to the next step. On the last step, and because I can't show you because for whatever reason, the last step is when you choose some syncing options. The first syncing option you choose is how to map it. You can either do it by email address or you can do it by reference ID in the customer record. Email address is pretty straightforward. It'll try to map it to an existing NetSuite customer by email. If it exists, it'll utilize that customer. If it doesn't exist, it'll create one anew. For duplicate records, if multiple customers in NetSuite are using the same email address, then the invoice will be linked to the customer which has been edited most recently. So that's not the best because, if you're going and editing multiple customers like frequently, it's going to kind of map those sales orders or invoices across them. So that's a potential support issue that would come up. Why was this mapped to this customer versus another one? Keep in mind that if they have the syncing on email address, maybe they have multiple customers and they just edited one more recently, and that's why it was mapped to that. What some people may utilize instead is reference ID, which is going to be a more unique value than email address, and something that they set and would have already set up in NetSuite if they wanted to map to existing ones. If not, it would move our reference ID over and then match on that from then on out. And then the last step is the when to sync from. You can sync, you'll see in the screenshot over here, begin to sync now, or you can pick a certain date to sync from, and then we'll sync the history there. This is capped at like September 10th or something like that. You actually won't be able to go back further than that. It's because we don't actually have the data available. That shouldn't be that big of a deal, at least until the backport happens. Then we're going to have to probably cross that bridge. But as of right now, any merchant that's going to be utilizing this, I think, would have access to all of their data based off of when invoice architecture went live in regards to people being able to set up sites. And then you would click save and continue. And then what would happen is you would actually end up now on this screen. This screen provides some helpful information to both you and the merchant. The first thing is viewing error logs. When this loads up, you'll be able to see any errors that occurred. And what would normally happen is that if you did run into an error, your status would get moved to like currently stuck, or I don't know the phrasing of the status, but it would not be connected. And then within the errors, it would show you if these ever loaded. Hey guys, this is a good training. I'm glad that we're not running into any issues at all here. Okay, so normally what happened is it would show the errors in a log, and it would tell you what invoice errored out and an error message associated with that. We'll see that in the admin panel, which you guys will have access to. It basically is the same thing. The other option you have is Sync Now, which does as you would expect. If you click it, it will go ahead and immediately sync your integration. Is this seriously not working either? I was testing this earlier today and it was working just fine. But this would sync everything. It causes an immediate sync to happen. I don't know if this is going to be around forever. I think this was implemented so for testing purposes, and there we go. For testing purposes, or for just for kind of the beta users, it was implemented. I don't know if it'll remain forever because of just, we don't want to bog down. We don't want to allow necessarily merchants to continually click sync now. And the reason why we do it every 2 hours is because we want to try to, lessen the workload on our side. But we'll see what happens. But this allows you to sync right away. Sales orders, we'll talk about this in a second. This just allows you to update what you sync to if you need. And then you saw me use these options before, which is managing. You can change your product mapping if needed, and then you can also edit your credentials as well. So once something syncs to NetSuite, it comes over as remember, sales order, invoice, and then a payment associated with that invoice. What we're looking at here is going to be a non-inventory item. So this is the simple workflow where everything syncs right away once it's paid. So this sales order is a invoice in Chargeify. If we actually go to this custom record here, you can it'll actually tell you the subdomain that it's related to. It'll tell you the Chargeify invoice number, and then also the UID, which allows you to get directly to the invoice in question. So if we come here, grab this, let's pull up our, let's pull up our invoice in particular. Okay, so we're looking at the Chargeify invoice here. You'll see it was on automatic billing. It was issued, paid right away, $165.93. Here's the sales order in NetSuite, $165.93. If we click on the items, you'll see that each of the items I'd previously mapped to the associated items in NetSuite. So base plan was to the, how much is the base plan? 170? No, base plan was Chargeify one time. Chargeify Gold plan was mapped to the quantity component. And then you'll see the Chargeify tax item that I talked about because we don't use the built-in NetSuite taxes. Chargeify tax item has a description of the taxes applied, and then it will be totaled out at the total amount of taxes collected.
Why is it not in the tax total in the blue box at the top right?
That's because this is the built-in NetSuite taxes, and ours is just going to be a line item on the invoice. Yeah. So from here, we can go to related records, and you'll see that there is a invoice associated with it. So we click invoice, and we'll see that the invoice was paid in full. And the reason why it was paid in full is because it was an automatic payment. And then this is the payment, the third and final piece that was applied to this invoice to pay it in full. If this was an open invoice, that would be marked as an open invoice not paid in full. And then once the payment was collected in Chargeify against that invoice, the payment would get synced over, linked to the invoice, and then the invoice would move into a paid in full. This is pretty straightforward for automatic billing and open billing for non-inventory items. However, for inventory items, the process is a little bit more complicated. So like I said, we'll show in the UI, we tell them, hey, you need to go fulfill some orders because they're synced to inventory items. If they click view here, it'll actually give them a list to the things that need to be synced. And conveniently, they can actually just click this ID right here, and it'll open up the associated sales order that needs to be fulfilled in NetSuite, which is pretty nice. They don't have to go search for this. We can actually just link them directly to the proper sales order. So you'll see it's marked as pending fulfillment. So what we need to do is we click this fulfill button. From there, this would be, think of someone on the floor. They picked the item off the shelf. We are going to ship to, why does it do that? We're going to shift to a certain location. We're marking the item that we're picking, that sort of thing. And then we just click save. Okay, so I've picked the item. I've packed the item. I'm very, very quick at shipping things. I've marking it shipped because I sent it off to UPS there. It's shipped now, and then what we need to do is bill. So the whole process, and then there is automations in NetSuite for this, but it also can be a manual process where they have to go through this whole process for like it to be cleared out of Chargeify essentially. So we've fulfilled the sales order. Boom, packed, picked, shipped. You'll see now invoice to be generated, right? So we're generating the invoice. Everything should be automatically filled out from the sales order, the customer record, the line items that we shipped, everything like that. If you just click save, it should save out the invoice. Okay, and because we know there was already a payment associated with this invoice. It had already been synced. If you remember in the screenshot here, the payment goes over as a customer deposit already. It already marked this paid in full because it already knew there was associated payment for this invoice. And it went ahead and marked it accordingly. If it was an open invoice, it would just be it would be similar to the something on remittance billing where it generates the invoice in an open state, and once a payment does come through, it will correctly mark. You're probably not doing that though, because if you're shipping items, you're collecting the money usually ahead of time, but that workflow does work if needed. So those are kind of the key differences between non-inventory and inventory items. What would happen is, I'm not sure how often this updates. Let's reload. But eventually this will clear out. It'll say, you have 0 sales order pending fulfillment, or more if I've, had more orders come in before then.
Can you explain the workflow if you're using reference ID? Just because I'm assuming you have to put the reference ID on a customer inside NetSuite before it syncs.
Right. So if they're existing customer records and you're wanting to map the Chargeify customers to your existing NetSuite customers, the reference ID would have to be, so it's kind of like similar to the Salesforce of what you talked about. Either you have existing reference IDs, and then when you create the customers in Chargeify, you would need to make sure those reference IDs are present, or before you enable the sync, you would need to kind of essentially backfill all of your customer records with the reference ID to map to that.
Do you know if people can do that via API? Like say for example, they have their own website, customer makes the purchase, they create a reference ID, they push that to the customer in NetSuite before they create the subscription in Chargeify, and then it has a way to match up. It's essentially the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know much about NetSuite's API, to be honest. I don't know how theirs works. In that case, though, because it'd probably be a new customer. It would just create it in Chargeify. The reference ID would be present in our customer record, and then when it synced, it would create the customer with the proper reference ID. But if it was an existing customer record in NetSuite, that's where it gets complicated. You need to make sure essentially to backfill your Chargeify site.
Yeah, I'm thinking like second subscription, existing customers.
Right. Yeah, it would have to be there. I'm sure there's probably a workflow out there. I'm just not sure how complicated, or I'm sure NetSuite has an API. I just don't know much about it. But I'm sure it's a field. It's just a common field in the customer record that would need to be filled out. So I'd assume that's possible.
Okay.
So we've gone through some examples and the setup process. So from a support standpoint, there's and I'll link this to y'all in the support room. There is a tool that we can use. It's that link right there. And we'll go through and I'll show you some examples in it. But overall, it lets you see the connected integrations. We're going to be adding additional functionality to it. Right now, there's like a sync now button, and it would sync all integrations, but we're going to add a sync now button next to each integration, so you can like force a resync immediately for specific integrations. You could also go into their integration section in their application and click that sync now button. It does the same thing. So it'd just be easier to be able to manage from the admin tool. You can see what invoices errored, and you can go in and see specifically like what the error was. You can also see what invoices synced to NetSuite. And so like, how it 0, someone says, oh, this statement didn't sync to 0. And we run some console commands and pull this invoice ID and we say, oh no, it did. Here's the invoice ID. Similar, we are mapping in the database, and we have access to what sales order ID was created, what invoice ID was created, what payment ID was created, and we can actually provide those to the merchant, which I think is really helpful, because if a merchant comes and says, "Oh, things aren't syncing," you can go, "No, they are. Here's this invoice, and here's where it ended up in NetSuite. Check it out." So I think it'll be very helpful. With talking to Lukasz, or I think I said it right, but he knows that we're going to be relying on him and the team quite a bit once this integration first goes into play, because there's certain errors they're still working through, that sort of thing. So he's well aware that we're going to be, I wouldn't say we're leaning on him a bit while we kind of work out those kinks. So don't feel afraid to pop into the ecosystem room and ask. I think most of the team is in Poland though, so we'll have to figure out kind of how that time zone difference works there. So that's the end of PowerPoint, but let's go ahead and take a look at the admin tool that I was talking about. So here it is. When you first access this, it'll ask you to sign in. If you click it, it'll utilize your Chargeify. It's a single sign-on with your Chargeify Gmail. So you just click, approve for your email, and it'll log you in automatically here. And what it'll take you to is this dashboard screen, which shows all connected, currently connected integrations. Like I said, there's a sync now, but it syncs everything. He's going to add a button in next to each one of these where you could click it and it would sync that individual integration. Any of these, if you click on it, it'll give you a little bit more information about the integration, what they're syncing on. And then if there was any errors, they'll show here. And I actually have an example of that. So this is on staging, but if someone said, oh, it's not connected, or I'm running into an error, you could click in here, click to this, and it will actually give you any errors with the integration itself. So there's going to be errors that occur on the invoice level stuff, but then there will also potentially be errors integration wide. In this case, they didn't have the Brazilian currency set up in their NetSuite. So we need to go into NetSuite, set up the proper currency settings, and then essentially reconnect as well.
I just typed a question. I'll just ask it. If some of the settings are missed during the configuration, I think this is what you were just saying. Is there examples of what we might see happen? Like, is that a log from something that was missing?
So it's not So in order to even get the integration set up, you have to go through every single step. This would be if you connected, authenticated, you mapped all the products, right? And then it got to the point of trying to sync. It would run into this, because the Brazilian currency wasn't set up in NetSuite. So it would actually allow you to get through the whole kind of process. Any other things, so like authentication issues, right? You put in the wrong consumer key, it'll tell you that. It'll say it can't authenticate, right? Because it doesn't have the proper value. So we'll kind of tell you those things. If you don't, it won't let you proceed if you don't map all the products, that sort of
What
thing.
about like the view permission for the user and stuff like that?
So that would allow you likely to get through you can't create the access token until you create those views and everything. I guess if you put in an access token that was the wrong access token, it would either let you go through and then error out like this and provide an error to us, or it might be on screen. I don't actually know where that error handling is occurring, whether if it's on screen or if it's.
I got that error when I first tried it out because
Okay.
I named my integration Chargeify and
Okay.
I did instead of my name. So when I worked, it errored out on Chargeify page just because I didn't get the tokens set up right, so I couldn't even move on to the product mapping. Did
it tell you though your token's wrong or something, or did it just say? Okay.
It just said that authentication failed. Big red pop up that came up in Chargeify.
Okay. So probably the most that honestly, because you saw the kind of the workflow and the process for that might be the most common error we get is like authentication errors. There's not really much we can do, because we don't have access to their NetSuite account. The best case scenario is kind of walk them through the steps that we walk through in the documentation, which are clear enough to tell you kind of where to go. But I could see someone accidentally putting, the secret into the token spot, or, forgetting to copy it down, or they're using an old one, or, there's a lot of different things where people could put in the wrong information.
Salesforce has that thing where they can enable support access and make it like log in using their user. Is that the same thing in NetSuite?
I don't know. I don't know. I would assume they have something. Like that. I think a lot of businesses kind of do those sort of things, but I don't actually know for sure. I can ask and follow up afterwards. Support. Sorry, just writing it down so I don't forget. Okay, so the admin screen will kind of go through each one of these options. Let me get a drink of water real quick. Sorry. All right. So you'll see all connected integrations. If an integration is airing out, you can click in and you'll see that here. Otherwise, sync now. This check pending fulfillment now, this is going to get removed because this was just implemented for testing phases because there was no automated process to check for this. So you can ignore this button. It's going to go away because it's done automatically now. Next bit here is, so dashboard is a dashboard. It's what you log in at. Chargeify invoices. This will list for all sites it's a list of invoices that were synced. What you can do though is if you make note of the ID, and this is the integration ID, it's not like their site ID. If you make note of the integration ID here, when you come over here, if you click this number, it'll actually filter, it'll apply a filter you'll see up here to just this site. So you can actually filter, and you could also just type this in up here. It'll filter the invoices for just that site. So you can come in, and for ones that were synced successfully, you'll see it in a completed state. And if you were to click in here, this is what I mentioned before. You'll see what sales order ID it was mapped to. And if we actually just grab this, copy this out, and come over here. This is another helpful thing. You can actually search for certain pages because these drop down, this like list, it's kind of hard to determine where things are. Sales, invoice sales orders, is it sales orders here, whatever. If you actually just come up here and type page : and then sales order, it'll be right here. You can do page customers, you can do page invoices, page payments. You can do customer : and put in like a customer name and find it pretty easily. So we grabbed the sales ID from the integration. So if we enter this in, it'll take us straight to that particular sales order. So I could see this being useful for if someone says, "Oh, this didn't sync," we can say, "Oh, it did sync. It was completed. Here's the sales order ID. That's where you find it." We'll also have the customer record as well.
Can you search that, just the number in the search bar instead of going to that page?
No. Doesn't allow you to. You might be able, I don't know if it may be like sales order or something like this, possibly. No, doesn't look like it. So it'll give you information here, but what's useful is for looking at failed to sync items. And by the way, when it fails to sync, the integration will be paused until this thing is fixed, and then we'll catch up all the invoices that occurred after that. So we come in here, take a look. We can see why it failed. It cannot initialize invoice, invalid reference 1512. I don't know what this means. I talked to the team, and they figured it out. Essentially, you can have an item that's a non-inventory item marked for item fulfillment, which essentially turns it into an inventory item, but it's still categorized as a non-inventory item. So it was like our workflow is not accounting for that, so they're going to fix that now and get this working. But sometimes information in here will be helpful and beneficial. Sometimes it'll be something like this where you're not going to necessarily be able to troubleshoot what this means, and in which case this is when we would get the ecosystem team involved, at least until we work out like common errors and that sort of thing, because there's not really, our hands are kind of tied. There's not much we can do to figure it out and go from there. So that's how you would find out if a particular item failed, and it'll give you some error information. And that's just this lists all invoices, and then the error logs is just going to give you things that are erroring out, and then gives you like what the exceptions were for them. And here again, you can click this to filter for, and then if you click this button here, it'll filter for this particular invoice. And it'll actually show you all errors it ran into. So this might be helpful to see if like, oh, previously it was running into this error, and then they fixed it, and then it ran into this error, that sort of thing. You can see the history of the errors for that particular invoice. For finding the items within Chargeify, again, this is the UID. You can copy and paste this. You saw me do it before. If you just come in here and copy and paste in the URL, it'll take you directly to that particular invoice. Wrong site. I think it's on a different site. Yeah, it's on my customer hierarchy site. Or alternatively, if you come into this and you search for number, this will be the invoice number. So like INV dash and then this number. So if you're looking at the invoice list, you can find it that way as well. I find the UID easier because you can go directly to the invoice. So yeah, that's actually pretty much everything. So from a support standpoint, you're going to utilize this tool to troubleshoot, to find errors, exceptions, that sort of thing. And then, if someone calls in and they need help going through and setting up the integration, hopefully this walkthrough made you at least a little bit comfortable on kind of where you have to go. Honestly, I've done this setup like 3 or 4 times, and I still have to reference the documentation on what goes where, since there is a lot of steps. So it's pretty, if you get on a call with someone, you're probably going to have the documentation right in front of you and kind of walk them through that, because it gives you just like clear, like, here's the next step and here's the things to do. So any other questions about the integration, about setting it up, anything like that?
Do we know any merchants that want to start using this now, like for beta? Because I remember speaking with somebody and they said they were promised to be in the beta before the end of the year. So
it's not. It's moving out of beta. So this goes live tomorrow. They're removing the beta tag. It's not in beta anymore. It is full on general availability come tomorrow. That's why this training kind of came out of nowhere. So beta tags can be removed. There's only one merchant, I think, actively using this right now. It's called Bitmovin. Is the name of the merchant. But I don't know if we have. I think a lot of people that are going to want to utilize this are in the sales funnel right now. They're getting sold to, and when they sign on, they'll be utilizing Netsuite. It's one of the bigger asks, I think, and the reason why we prioritize the integration is it's one, bigger merchants are during the sales process have been requesting it for a while. So we don't have too many existing ones that are going to be using it. And it also, because it's only on the invoice architecture, we're a little bit, our hands are tied for existing merchants, because they have to already be utilizing that site setup. Otherwise, they won't be able to have access to it. Any other questions? I think that overall, the support of this is going to be a little bit organic. We're going to have to just kind of on the fly figure things out, unfortunately, because there's so many different errors and exceptions. And you saw what NetSuite looks like. There's like so much stuff in there that I think there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So we'll just have to keep in touch with the ecosystem team, and then make sure that we're documenting, as errors arise, and if they're going to be something that will continue to be ran into, like we should start an internal, like frequently asked questions about NetSuite, that sort of thing. And again, like I said, it'll be more of an organic process. We'll just have to, as those things come up, make sure the team's aware of it, and then go from there. Cool. Well, thanks, guys.